Well, hello, kids. This will be for day two, which should be March 31st. And we left off yesterday talking about how not Beethoven, I'm sorry, how Brahms was 19 years old and had destroyed all of the beautiful music he had already written because he was a perfectionist. Here's a picture of Brahms, and he's about 20 years old during this. Well, he is 20 years old on this. And I also have a piece of music I want you to hear. This is a sonata that he had written, and it was a sonata in E flat. Here it goes. Soft and pretty. A lot of his music was very easy listening. I'm not saying he didn't have the marches and that were in there and his homeland kind of dances, his country dances, but a lot of his music is just easy listening. Also, remember, anytime you're going through this and you have a question, just jot it down and then send me an email after you get through listening to it. So now Brahms is in his 20s. I talked a little bit how cranky he could get, I guess is an understatement to say. You did not bother this man while he was working on his music. Nobody did. Um, like a couple of the other composers that we've done, other famous people helped to make him known, get his name out there, and made him be more loved too in his area where he played. There was an accompanist. His name was Romani. He was a very famous violinist, and it was a huge break for Brahms whenever Romani heard Brahms play and asked him to be an accompanist with him, accompany him on the piano while he's playing the violin. And that happened for quite some amount of time, but Romani got into a lot of political things. I think he was exiled from the country, or he was on a blacklist, and so he couldn't play as many places as he wanted to because of his political views. But it didn't really matter because shortly, um, Brahms' name spread all around Europe, sort of on the tailcoats of Romani. But when he was through with that, he met another man. His name is Joseph Joachim. And I know it does not sound like it's written Joachim, but it is pronounced Joachim. He met Joseph Joachim, and he was this just fantastic. Matter of fact, the greatest violinist of his day. He was a conductor and a composer, so he was well rounded in the music world. He was about the same age as Brahms, he was a year older. But what was so, I guess, interesting for them is they saw eye to eye musically and in other matters too. They just thought a lot of the same things and had the same feelings about music and the same kind of music. So pretty soon Brahms was his accompanist, and that even soared Brahms' um, name out there, just like Johan's name was out there. Johann they were really close friends, and they were lifelong friends, even though there were times that Brahms refused to speak to Johann because he was angry about something. I think that one point, there was one time he went 2 years without talking to him. So it's a little weird that I'm going to say they were close friends and lifelong friendship with him. They really, really liked each other. But sometimes Brahms was a little hard to get along with. Anyway, Johann being so popular, and also back then, the days of that time, if you wanted to go meet somebody famous, you weren't just going to walk up to their house and he's going to let you in. Or if you wanted to meet somebody with some standing in life, and I'm talking like royalty, dukes, or lords, you don't just walk up to the house. They are not going to see you. So you get a letter of introduction from somebody, and that letter would allow you to get in, sort of like a ticket to get in to speak with them. Well, Johann was the violinist, or was the famous person who gave a letter of introduction to Brahms to meet Franz Liszt. We're going to talk about Franz Liszt next week. But also, I know you've heard me say the name Robert and Clara Schumann. They were the music duo. They were both uh, concert pianists. Well, until Robert was trying to do a fingering exercise, and I believe it was his right finger on his right hand. He created this little device that was going to make his fingers so much better, so he could do wonderful techniques with his hands, and it tore his ligaments, and he had to give up um, being a concert pianist altogether. But anyway, but his wife was also a concert pianist, Clara, and they have a whole other story to tell. But where I want to start with their story is they were a musical couple, and they were the publishers and editor of the newspaper, the music newspaper. It was only about music. It was called the New Journal of Music. So they were highly thought of in the musical world by most people. Maybe not so much Franz Liszt or Wagner, and I think I've mentioned that to you before. But anyway, Johann's the one that gave him that letter of introduction to go meet Franz and Claire. And when they did meet each other, once it was Franz, another, they had total opposite kind of reaction when they got there, and we'll talk about that. So Brahms went to Robert and Claris and showed the letter of introduction. And matter of fact, Johann had already told Robert and Clara, hey, I'm sending somebody, you're really going to love them. So they were really expecting him, which surprised Brahms too, that they were just greeted him so happily. And anyway, they had a really good relationship. Actually, they had a fantastic relationship. It was I was going to say like they were family, but probably better than a lot of times some families. They were kindred spirits. They had major respect for each other, not just in the music world, but also the same point of view that they did in life and education, just everything. They were so much the same. But meeting the Schumanns was an absolute boost for Brahms. It was the turning point of his career. He was recognized by Schumann's. They loved him. They loved his music. Matter of fact, if I remember correctly, Brahms is playing for Robert. Claire's upstairs taking care of the kids, and he hollers up. Robert hollers upstairs, said, "Clara, you've got to come down. He's here. The one that Johann was talking about. Come on down and listen to him." And when they did, they just bonded anyway. So they were pretty excited to see him anyway. So because they liked him that much, and the Schumanns recognized him as being a musical genius that the world has not heard yet, and so in his new journal of music, he wrote this big article about how wonderful he was, and there's a newcomer that people don't know in the world, and y'all are going to be so excited to hear him. So it really gave him a boost, and everybody was anticipating listening to Brahms. Like I said, Brahms sometimes was hard to deal with. I already mentioned that about Johann. But even with Clara, and he loved Robert and Clara, but I don't think he really fought so much with Robert, because I think it happened after Robert had died, whenever they clashed a little bit, Clara and Johann, Johannes anyway. So, but sometimes even they weren't talking much. Remember, it's his tactfulness and diplomacy was just not his strong suit. Um, Brahms, sadly to say, was basically a lonely, isolated man who did share with others and enjoy other people, but he also closed a lot of people out. His main thing in life was his work, and his work was about music. Well, it's time I want to talk to you a little bit more about Robert and Clara. I know I have before, but let's fill in a few of the blank spots before we get back into Brahms and what happened with his life. So Robert got sick, and they didn't really put this in many places, but he ended up with syphilis, which he evidently had had for quite some time. But the syphilis, of course, they didn't have medication to take care of that like they do now, the antibiotics, and it attacked your body, and it was not a good thing anyway. He had ended up with a ringing in his ear. It was an A minor sound in his ear all the time. Sometimes that didn't drive him nuts, but if you're trying to write a piece of music and say D major or something, and you're hearing A minor in your head all the time, I cannot imagine how frustrating that was for a composer. He said that sometimes this ringing in his ears that he had in that A minor note um, felt like 10,000 angels to him. It was okay, but most of the time, other times, it was like demons. He just couldn't take it anymore. He tried to kill himself by drowning himself in the river, but this boater that came up saw it and he saved his life, which Robert Schumann did was hoping that wouldn't happen, but it did. So he saved Robert's life. And Robert ended up in a mental institution. Like I told you, the syphilis attacks the nerves of your body. Your body doesn't do what your mind's telling it to do. When we study Scott Joplin, he had the same thing, and his music uh, just got worse and worse and worse because his fingers wouldn't do what they were supposed to. And after a while, your mind doesn't do what you're supposed to. It just starts little and just infects your whole body that way. Anyway, so Robert Schumann's in a mental institution, and he could not speak. It had evidently hit him in the part in his brain where he wasn't able to speak. So he never spoke again, and he died 2 years later. But I do know that Clara would come and visit as much as she could, but she had 5 kids that she's trying to raise and feed, and probably keeping the New Journal of Music open because it was making money for them. But she was a concert pianist and had to travel. But when she did come back into town, she'll always remember. I remember her writing somewhere that with fond memories, she'll always remember the last time that she saw her husband Robert, went to see him, and he put his arms around her. He could not speak, but it was a hug that she got that actually probably helped her until she died, just knowing that he did love her. Anyway, so now back with just Brahms and Clara. Brahms was in love with Clara now. And I'm sure they had very strong feelings for each other, just like Robert did. I mean, they were so close. But now Brahms is in love with Clara. And remember, she's 14 years older than he is. But remember, that didn't bother him because he was raised in a home where mom was 17 years older than his dad. A lot of people thought that they would get married. Many were surprised that they didn't, but he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it because he respected Robert so much and he respected Clara so much and their lives that they had together with their children. And he just couldn't do that to the memory of his friend because of such high regard he had for him, so he just could never do it. There was one time in his life that Brahms considered marrying someone, and I cannot think of her name, and many people were surprised it didn't happen, but at the last minute, he just backed out, which made this woman crushed. I remember she was crushed because she thought they were getting married, but he stayed single the rest of his life. He stayed single all of his life. He never did marry anyone. Now, I talked to you about how important a letter of introduction was, and when Brahms met Robert and Clara Schumann with this letter of introduction, Johann also sent a letter of introduction with Brahms to meet Franz Liszt. Franz Liszt is a very famous musician of this time. a concert pianist. And to me, he's the one that's very flamboyant. It's all about how you present yourself, all about how your hands are moving when you're playing the piano and giving a concert. He dressed really dapper and would wear gloves, and slowly he'd take the gloves off his hands. In truth, I like to say that he's sort of like the Elvis of his time back then, um, which is not Brahms. It's definitely not Brahms when you think about his little disheveled look and whatever kind of attitude until the music played, and then everything was perfection. But with Franz Liszt, it was also about the showmanship. And the thing about Franz Liszt and his showmanship, this is like the first time that people could see like a rock star, somebody that went out there and it was more than the music, even though, let me tell you, they say that nobody's ever played piano like Franz Liszt. His techniques taught the world many, many kinds of things, but he also was about the showmanship of it too. Um, let's see. So Brahms has this letter of introduction from Johann, and it was sort of a surprise to him when he got to Franz Liszt's house that Franz let him in, because earlier Brahms had sent some music up that he had written to Franz Liszt maybe a year ahead of time, and nobody ever responded. So Brahms is thinking, oh yeah, he probably won't even see me, but he did, and that shows the kind of musical pull and of greatness that Johann had that Franz Liszt would accept and see Brahms. Anyway, poor Brahms, he has no money and he's doing the best he can and he's walking to where it is. It's a couple of towns over. So he's walking. And when he got there, of course, he's tired. He went straight there. He didn't stop to eat. We're talking this kid. He's not really a kid, but he's a very young person, a young adult, very young adult. Doesn't have money, but he went straight to Franz Liszt, probably in his mind because he was so apprehensive about going and telling people how great he was because he was so meek. He probably thought in his head, let's get this over with. Anyway, Brahms walked a long way to get there, and he went straight to the home with his letter of introduction from Johann. And he brought with him a bunch of his musical manuscripts, which are his songs, basically. Now, Brahms was amazed at Liszt's skills. Liszt, Brahms couldn't even play his own music. He just felt totally unworthy in front of a fabulous composer, concert pianist like Franz Liszt. He just was too shy to even play. And Liszt said, "You know what? Okay, let me play some of the music that you brought." So Brahms is giving him his music, and he sits over there and he's playing Brahms music. Brahms is amazed. He'd heard about Franz Liszt and his techniques and all, but to hear it was totally different. So after he played some of Brahms' music, Liszt started playing some of his own music. He played a sonata in B minor. He put everything into it. Remember, I talked to you, he was talking about showmanship was a big part of his life. He put everything that he had in his performance. And I just realized I went way past 15 minutes. I think I'm going to have to start there tomorrow. And I'm going to close now, and we'll talk about Franz Liszt performance tomorrow on day 3. Bye.